us praise the Lord Jesus Christ, who is present among us and in the Word. Keeps us united in love. The story of Abraham is about Jesus, present among us and in the Word. And this year has been the year of Abraham. It's in our chapel reflections. Now as of today, you've heard the whole story. Obviously, though, it's been in pieces, right? It's been in increments. Starting last year, so those of you who are new didn't get to hear the beginning of the story. We've gone through it really slowly. We've unpacked a lot of the details in the individual chapters of his life. And as we're about to move on to Isaac and then next year on to Jacob, I think it's helpful to just stop here and instead of trying to parse all of these names that Judah dutifully and courageously attempted to say, well done, instead of that, since this is the death of Abraham, I think this isn't normally what I would do, but I think we're just going to actually just recount the whole story again, because when you're going through it that slowly, you see a lot of beautiful individual stories, but there's a big story. There's a meta-narrative, you could say, where you can really see a story arc, you could say. You can see his growth, you can see his development in a way you don't always get when you're just kind of going through it passage by passage. Because when you get the big picture, there's two things that come through really clearly in Abraham's life. One is that this is the story of God taking someone who has real but imperfect faith and a whole lot of flaws, and putting him through the refining fire of his life to fashion him into a saint. The clay gets molded over the course of many, many years. And we see Abraham's virtues, but we see his failings. But we also see how God uses his mistakes and his circumstances to teach him and help him grow, which I think is kind of an inspiring story for those of us who have a lot of flaws and failings and sins and have a whole lot of molding ahead of us. But the other thing that really comes through very clearly is that the story of Abraham is ultimately about Jesus. Jesus is the true hero of the story. So let's just get an overview of who Abraham is, and then we'll go through and you'll see how it plays out, right? We see that Abraham has a very powerful faith in God in some areas, but other times he shows a complete lack of confidence in God. By the way, and just note that you recognize yourself in any of this. He's extremely hospitable, right? He's kind to strangers, and yet he doesn't always show the affection to his wife that maybe he should. We know he's very brave in battle, but he really wants to avoid personal conflict and interpersonal drama with his family members. He wants to please people, even if that is at the cost of faithfulness to God. We know he's a very clever strategist and a bargainer, but that also means he often wants to be in charge of situations, right? He wants to manage them himself to make sure they work out instead of trusting them to God. He's a very mixed bag, this Abraham, but God chooses him. So let's review. We start off with this man named Terah, rich man named Terah. Terah, probably he's a worshiper of a god named Nana, who was the god of the moon, also the god of fertility, right? Because there's an obvious connection between the moon and fertility. By the way, his alternate name is Sin, or Sign, which is where you get the Sinai desert. So there's actually a whole subtext there about this fertile desert into which God comes. But that's later. That's the next book over. But anyways, the point is that was the god who was very popularly worshipped there. It's probably who Terah worships, because Terah lives in Ur, where there's this giant temple to Nana. And there's a subtle clue here, if you look at the genealogy, that even though Terah worships the god of fertility, he doesn't have a kid until he's 70 years old. Which if you go through the genealogy, all his ancestors are like 20 or 30. Terah doesn't have a kid until he's 70. So Nana's not really delivering on the whole fertility thing, right? Not until late in life. All right, well, Terah's first son is named Haran. Haran has some kids. One of them is a daughter named Milcah. One of them is a son named Lot. But then Haran dies. Well, Terah has another son named Nahor. And Nahor obligingly marries Milcah, his niece. They don't have any kids. Well, then he has another son. This is going to be the one that counts, right? We're going to name him Abram. Mighty father. Great father. Exalted father. And he's going to, he marries Sarai. The great father has no children. In fact, he has to adopt Lot. He has to adopt his nephew, right? Because he doesn't have a father anymore. This fertility god Nana does not seem to be blessing Terah's family. So Terah actually ends up moving. He moves from the city of Ur to the city of Haran, because Haran also has a huge temple to Nana. Maybe he'll have better luck there. Right? So see, Terah, he moves to a new land in hopes that his God will bless him. But then his son Abram discovers another God. The one true God who made heaven and earth, the God of his ancestor Shem, son of Noah. This God calls Abram to leave all of this behind. Leave this idol-worshipping family and this idol-worshipping city and come to a new land that he will show Abram. And God promises, I will make you a great nation and bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. It's not just for Abraham. It's still Abram at this point. It's for the whole world. Right? I will do what Nana can't. Right? So that's Abram's mission. Come to this new land where he will become a great nation and bless the whole earth. So when his father dies, Abram, who's now 75 years old, still childless, he obeys this new God. This old God, in fact. He takes his wife Sarai, he takes his nephew Lot, he takes his head servant Eleazar, and the 318 servants were born in his house and in his train. 318 is significant. 3 is the number of God. 10 is the number of the 10 Commandments, God's law. And 8, for the ancient world, is the smallest cube number. Because they don't count as a number. So like 2 would be you cube 2, comes to 8. So cube represents all the dimensions, right? So God's law established in every dimension of reality. That's the way the church fathers understand 318. So there's 318 servants, there's Eleazar, there's his family, and they said, not knowing where they're going. But he's trusting that God's going to get him there and show him that. And presumably he'll just have a child late in life, just like his dad did. That's us. Right? We walk by faith and not by sight. Even those of us who are pretty elderly now still don't always know where we're going. Right? You're not alone in that, guys. And that was Abraham, or Abram at this point, right? He walks by faith, not by sight, trusting in God. And for the rest of his life, Abraham will live in tents. Right? He's not going to be attached to the land. He's always going to be, even when he comes to the promised land, right? There's a certain sense that this world is not his final home. In a real sense, ultimately, the land he's looking for, as it says in the book of Hebrews, is the next world, is heaven. Right? And so, in a sense, he's always detached. He's always going to be living in tents. Right? There's a certain lesson for us here, too. These are our tents. This world's not our final home. And then Abram comes to the land of Shechem, and he stops by something. Now, you see, I don't remember. This is a very passing thing, but in Shechem, what does he stop and see? You remember? Not quite. But you're on the right. You're at the right thing in your mind. Something. It's something that's natural for sure. What do you want? It's a tree actually. What is described as the word is actually a mighty tree is what the word sort of means in Hebrew, right? A great and mighty oak tree. He stops at Shechem and raises an altar there. What do trees mean in the Bible? Okay, so they give life, right? That's a good kind of universal thing. They're life-bearing, they're living things. What else? Sandy, the trees of the garden. So it's evoking Eden right away. Thinking about that kind of salvation historical thing. What else, Judah? Yes. Yeah, the tree, right? Some of you should have remembered this. Dr. McClarney was talking about it a couple of days ago, right? The hanging on a tree and the law, right? Every time you see a tree, you have to at least be like, the cross has to occur to you. And again, here he comes to this great tree, he raises up an altar, and God appears to him and says, I will give this land. This is the place I was talking about. Right? So we've got here an altar and a tree, right? The cross is already implicit here. And God's saying, I will give this land to your seed. And Paul says something really interesting in Galatians 3. He's talking about this prophecy. And Paul says, these prophecies were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. This is Paul talking here. Scripture does not say, and to seeds, meaning many people, but and to your seed, meaning one person who is Christ. So really what God is saying is, I will give this land to Christ. Right? All of this is for your descendant, Jesus, right? Who's going to be the salvation of the whole world. That's the way you're going to be blessed. So again, the cross, which is both a tree and an altar, already anticipated here in Shechem. The story of Abraham is about Jesus. And then he goes on and he pitches his tent somewhere else and raises up another altar, and it's between Bethel and Ai. It's literally the letters Ai, which is amazing. Bethel means house of God. Ai, amazingly enough, means destruction. Ai means destruction. The city of Ai means destruction. It's really fascinating. Probably there was something in its past that spoke to that, but also it's prophetically meaningful because throughout his life, that's going to be Abraham. He's somewhere between the house of God and destruction. He's always kind of vacillating between these two, right? So again, if that's sometimes how you feel, like you're swaying back and forth, right, between the narrow path and the wide one, that's going to be Abraham. There's little things like that all through the story, right? But he goes there and he raises up an altar, right? And from now on, when you read the story again, notice every time he kind of comes here, it shows his faith is doing well. Every time he moves away from here, his faith is waning. Like he's moving away from God. So for example, right after this, there's a famine in the land. And this sometimes happens. God will say, hey, do this thing. You'll do it. And then immediately everything seems to go badly. We have this sort of idea that if you're following God's will, things will immediately click into place around you. Not what happens with Abraham. He shows up in the place where God calls him to, and almost immediately there's a famine. So he understandably goes to Egypt, which is a rich, lush land, right? But he's leaving the spot that God has just told him, I've given you. Right? And not only that, it starts with that. It starts with, well, God's not giving me food right now. I better go find food. A little incremental thing. Then it's, oh, my wife's really beautiful. They might want to take her. Oh, they might want to kill me. I better lie and say she's my sister. Now, why should he have complete 100% assurance that that's not going to happen? And Sarah, do you want to fill that out? Why does that mean? Why does he mean he's not going to die?
Because God already told him that his seed will.
Exactly. So he should be completely confident that he's not going to die here. But you see that initial thing of, well, I don't see any food around here. God won't, maybe I'll just go over here. Let's go to this new place and get some food here. Just that initial doubt in God spreads to where the whole thing is now in question. And, basically, by the way, notice that also means he's willing to lose his wife and give up God's promise in order to avoid trouble with Pharaoh. Like, he has no game plan for getting her back, right? Like, if they take her, then what? Again, so he's kind of stepping away from God and he's stepping away from his wife to save his own skin. That's what I mean about how he doesn't always show the affection to his wife he ought to. And sure enough, Pharaoh does take Sarai. And in exchange, he gives Abram a whole bunch of goods and slaves, including a slave girl named Hagar. Things seem to be working out. Other than, him losing his wife and disobeying God. But from a worldly perspective, he's got food, he's got a whole bunch of goods, and he's not dead. Right? So it's easy for us to fall into that way of looking at the world and saying, well, from a worldly perspective, things are going great. But fortunately, God wrecks all that. Fortunately for him. Pharaoh's household gets attacked by plagues. Whipped with plagues, is what it says in the Latin. Pharaoh figures out that something's up, so he confronts Abram about it, kicks him out with all the goods, kicks them out of Egypt. So it doesn't really work out after all. And it's about to get worse. But stop for a second here. What does that story remind you of? Jenna?
Well, later in Egypt with Joseph.
The whole thing will be a recap, right? There's going to be a famine, and the Hebrews are going to come into Egypt, and then eventually there's going to be plagues on Pharaoh's house, and he's going to send the family out with a whole bunch of goods. So this is showing that even in the midst of all of this, failure to serve God and all this sinfulness, God's got a plan. And he gives a little foreshadowing of it. So no matter what's going on, God already has a plan. Okay. Back to Abram. Abram comes out with Lot. Now he's been blessed with so many new slaves, so many new goods. But now there's a problem. The land doesn't have enough room for all of his servants and goods and all of Lot's servants and goods. And now they're fighting. They're squabbling amongst each other because there's not enough room. So this blessing from Egypt has turned out to be a real problem now. Right? We sometimes we're short-sighted. Oh, this thing seemed like a really great opportunity. But then down the road, it turns out it was a bad thing. Now, there's ways Abram could have solved this, right? Abram could have given away all of those goods, sent them back to Egypt, or encouraged Lot to think about that too, or just like mediated between these conflicts. But his actual solution is so much worse, because Abram goes up to Lot and says, "I know there's a lot of conflict between our guys. Let's not fight. It's not worth fighting about. How about we split up, and you live wherever you want to live, and then I'll go live wherever the other place is. You pick where you want to live, and I'll move to accommodate you." Now that sounds very obliging and generous, but why is that totally wrong? Well, what has God said, Sarah?
He's leaving the promised land.
The exact spot that God told him to come to. Right? Now again, it's like Sarah, right? God has said this, you're gonna have kids and a family. I don't want to have problems with Pharaoh. I'm willing to let this promise of God go and this woman go, right? Here, this is the land God's giving me. I don't want to have conflict with my nephew. If he wants this land, he can have it, and I'll move somewhere else, right? It seems so, and in this case, it seems so considerate, like, oh, what a nice guy, he's accommodating his nephew. That's not going to help his nephew out, as we'll find out, right? But anyways, in the providence of God, Lot decides to move to Sodom, because Sodom looks really beautiful. It looks like Egypt. So he leaves this appealing, this land, and he goes to this more appealing place. And Abram is once again childless. His adopted son has left him. And that's when God speaks to him again and says, look around, walk around this land, and all of it is yours. And I'm going to give it to your seed, who are going to be as many as the dust you're stepping in. Kind of a gentle reminder for Abram. Right? So he takes that to heart, and he moves to an area called Hebron. And does anyone remember, where does he live? What's around him where he lives? Hands up if you remember. Oaks. It's a grove. The Oaks of Mamre is what it's called, right? It's owned by this guy who's a Hittite, right? He's got like 2 brothers, and he immediately makes a covenant with those guys. So he's like having good relationships with the Hittites. Are going to be enemies of Israel later on, but they're friends of Abraham now, right? Abraham now. So he makes covenant with them, and he lives amongst the oaks, right? Follow these mighty trees, and he builds an altar among the altar and trees. Cross is anticipated here. But one day, a fugitive runs in, gasping, covered with blood. There's 4 kingdoms, and they've conquered the 5 cities nearby, including Sodom, and taken everyone there captive, including Lot. So look, Abraham's great solution, you just live where you want, everyone will live, and I'll work around it. Well, that led Lot to go move to Sodom, which is an evil city, and now he's been kidnapped. Imagine Abraham feels kind of guilty about this. So he gets the 318 servants, divides them up into 4 different groups, gets his 3 Hittite friends to command them, and they go by night. 318 guys against 4 kingdoms by night. It's a clever move, though. Right? Splitting them up, going at nighttime when everyone's asleep, and by the grace of God, it works. Right? He defeats the 4 kingdoms, and he frees Lot. So notice this. Sodom is a wicked city, but Abraham is willing to save it if it means he can save Lot. So the king of Sodom comes out and says, thanks for saving us, Abram. Here's a blank check. Take whatever you want as gratitude. Hands up, what does Abram say in response? It's praising. That's how you go.
He's like, I will even take the sandal.
Not even some sandals, that's too generous. Not even a shoestring, not even a string of the sandal. Because he's learned his lesson from Egypt. Doesn't matter if it looks like a golden opportunity. Here's a bunch of good free stuff. If you're taking it from the world, if you're taking it from an evil kingdom, it's not worth it. That happened with Pharaoh, and look where it got him. He's not going to make that mistake again. So again, we see he's being molded. This is going to happen in your life. I'm sorry to tell you this, but this is what's going to happen in your life too. You're going to make mistakes because they seem totally reasonable to you at the time. The good news is God will use that to mold you, and you'll learn from it if you are open to it. Cooperate with grace. But there's another king who shows up from a city named Salem. What does Salem mean? Think of shalom. Think of shalom. What does shalom mean? Now, Thomas.
Peace.
Yeah, it means peace. Later, that city will be known as Jerusalem. And this king is also a priest. This priest king of Jerusalem comes and he offers a meal that is also a sacrifice of bread and wine. And of bread and wine. And nonsense. And that's something he accepts. And then he gives a tenth, instead of accepting gifts from Sodom, he takes a tenth of everything he has and gives it to this priest king Melchizedek of Jerusalem, who offers bread and wine. What is this all about, right? Melchizedek is anticipating Jesus. Right? The story of Abraham is about Jesus. That's what this is a sign of here. But of course, Abraham must still be being frightened, right? He's just defeated 4 kingdoms. They're probably going to want to be back for revenge. He's just declined a blank check of all the goods he wants, and he just gave away a tenth of everything he owns. He might be feeling a little poor. And oh yeah, he's still childless. Lot doesn't move back with him. Lot stays in Sodom. Probably he's not feeling great. And sometimes that happens. You fall full of God, and you don't feel great afterwards. But God appears to him, and God says, "Fear not, for I am your shield, your protector. Don't be scared of those guys. I'm your protector, and I am your very great reward. Don't worry about all those goods. I am your reward." And Abraham's like, "Cool, but when am I having a kid? Because right now Eliezer is going to inherit all my stuff at this point, right? And I'm getting up there." God takes him outside, shows him the stars, and says, "Count the stars. As many as, if you can't count those, you won't be able to count your descendants either." Right? Like the first astronomy in the Bible. And Abraham believes, and it is counted as righteousness. This is a whole thing in itself, but you will find this gets quoted many times in the New Testament. Because Paul makes the point of, it's not that he's following the law, he doesn't have the law yet. He doesn't even have circumcision yet. And as we've seen, he's a very flawed guy, but he believes God, and that is counted as righteousness. This is why faith is a theological virtue, right? Just having that confidence in God, even with all our failings, is meritorious. And then God makes this beautiful covenant to him. Remember, Dr. McClarty exposited this so wonderfully. If you haven't, go back and listen to his talk if you don't remember it. But Abraham takes animals, cuts them in half in most cases, puts them on either side, right? Darkness falls. Great terror comes over Abraham's darkness, surrounded by these dead animals, right? And God says to him, "You're going to have descendants, and they're going to be slaves for 400 years, but I'm going to lead them out, and they're going to get this land you're standing on right now." And then God walks between the animals. And this is what this means. You know when you talk about cutting a deal? That's what it means in Hebrew. You cut a covenant. What that means is you cut the animal in half and walk between it. Both of you walk between it. And what you're saying is, if I break this covenant, may I be torn apart like these animals. But Abraham does not walk through there. Only God does. It's a unilateral covenant. Doesn't matter how much you mess up. God is saying, may I be torn apart if I break my word to you. Right? By the way, then the way this appears is that it's like a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch. You should think of the Bible. Try to visualize those. What does that remind you of?
Moses,
Pillar of fire. He shows, and he gets a kind of a vision of the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that are going to lead them through the parted Red Sea, right, to the promised land. Right? So again, it's like the Egypt thing. God is foreshadowing all this. This has all been the plan. And by the way, there's one other time God makes a covenant with us, where he is hanging between 2 dead people, his body torn apart. This is my blood of the new covenant. The story of Abraham is about Jesus. What a beautiful moment. Next thing that happens, Sarah demands, "Hey, can you impregnate my maid? Because I'm not having any kids." Right? This servant from Egypt, right? And without praying, without asking God, without telling Sarah, no, I love you. You're my wife, and things might look rough, but I'm gonna wait. We gotta trust in God, and you're the only woman for me. Like, yeah, all right, cool. That makes sense. Because again, you see, like, he wants to avoid conflict with his wife, and once again, like before, there's a famine, so they go to Egypt, and it doesn't work out. Now there's this famine of children, so they go to an Egyptian, right? They go to Hagar, trying to make this work for themselves, right? We always want to go to Egypt because it makes sense to us in the worldly perspective. But then, of course, Hagar gets pregnant, and she starts despising Sarah because she's pregnant and Sarah's not. Sarah complains to this of Abraham, and Abraham shrugs it off and she's like, she's your maid, you deal with it. Right? And then Sarah starts to abuse Hagar, which, may I remind you, she is pregnant with Abraham's son at this point. So when she's like abusing his own kid indirectly, and Abraham doesn't stand up for his wife, He doesn't stand up for this girl he just impregnated. He doesn't stand up for his son, who's currently in her womb. Because again, he's trying to avoid conflict. But too often, something that seems like, oh, you just don't want to have conflict, it leads to other people being hurt, right? Anyways, God does intervene on Hagar's behalf because Abraham doesn't. They have a son named Ishmael, and then 13 years later, Abram is 99 years old. Abram thinks his body is dead. And then his wife's body is basically, in the sense that no new life is going to come out of them. But God appears and reassures him. Sarai will have a child. Abraham is so skeptical, he laughs. He falls on his face and laughs. And says, well, I sure hope Ishmael is before you, because this is the only thing I'm going to be able to offer. Right? God's having none of that. He says, don't worry, I will bless Ishmael. Ishmael is going to be a great nation too, because he's your son. He's going to have 12 sons of his own, right? But you and Sarah are going to have a child together. That's going to be the heir of the covenant. That's going to be where from whom Jesus comes. And that's when God changes Abram's name to Abraham, father of many. Sarah's name is Sarah, right? And gives them the covenant of circumcision. And once again, for all his faults, Abraham, which is now his name, trusts in God. He trusts God enough to undergo circumcision at 99 years old, right? That's an act of faith. And he circumcises all the males in his household, including Ishmael. This faith needs help, but it's a real faith, which is a faith you have by virtue of your baptism, right? It's imprinted on you, all right, by virtue of you having this indelible mark. Right afterwards, Abram, who is 99 years old and is freshly circumcised, it's the middle of the day in the heat. He sees three strangers in the middle of the desert. It's not safe. He gets up, rushes over to them. Imagine, right in the heat, this old man runs over and says, here, come, let me wash your feet. Let me take care of you. Again, he's a compassionate guy. He cares for others. And he doesn't know these are angels yet, but he wants to care for them and deny himself. And these three guests repeat the message. In 1 year, we're going to return bringing life, and Sarah will have a child. So there's a message of life, but there's also a message of death. They say, we're going to go check out Sodom and see if it's as bad as people say. What does Abraham do?
Doesn't he make okay?
He tries to barter him down. He tries to like barter, like they're in market, like, well, I know I'm only dust and ashes, but what if there's like 50 righteous people there? Then will you spare Sodom? And God says yes. And he works him down to 10. Right? If you go back and watch Dr. McFarlane's reflection about the significance of 10, it's the number you need for a synagogue. But the point is, like, he's willing to save Sodom for the sake of Lot, right? But the next morning, and the Bible has this detail, he gets up in the morning, looks out, and he sees the smoke of Sodom ascending. And that seems to really shake him, because the next thing that happens is he leaves the promised land. He goes to the Philistine city of Gerar. And I think, my suspicion here is that he thinks, I was willing to save Sodom for the sake of Lot, but God wasn't. Who is this God? I'm supposed to be a blessing to the nations. These are the nations, right? Like, it's a very disorienting thing for him. He leaves the promised land behind. He goes to Gerar, and what does he say about his wife? It's all this stuff has happened, and he's back to square one. Don't answer this. Don't put your hand up. But do you ever feel that way? Like, you've made a whole bunch. You feel like you're making a whole bunch of progress, and then you go back to confession, and it's the same sins you were repeating, like when your first confession, basically. This is why I love the story, though. This is why I know this is like not the most. I don't like giving reflections that are this big picture things. I like to kind of focus on. But you see how seeing the big picture, like, you get this narrative that's very relatable and very understandable and very real and human. So once again, he's not trusting God. He's not, again, showing a ton of affection for his wife. He tricked God over that in less than a year you're going to have a kid. And again, he's like, well, what if they kill me and take my wife? Like, God has spoken to you and said this isn't going to happen. But again, he's back. He's lapsed into this again. But sure enough, Abimelech the king takes Sarah. This time God curses the house that all the women in his household are in for a time. But God also appears to Abimelech and says, here's what's up, right? And Abimelech then confronts Abram about this, but he also kind of says to him, like, he asks him to pray for them, and he gives Sarah back. and gives a big dowry. It's like a dowry, it's like a bunch of money. Right? And it's almost like this is the wedding. Right? It's almost like she's being given with a sum of money back to Abraham. And so this whole time, Abraham's not been a great husband to her, but in this moment, with Abimelech confronting him and saying, why would you let me sin like this? That's showing Abraham, no, these pagans do have a relationship to God. They are capable of virtue. In fact, Abimelech's being more virtuous than I am right now. This is the woman for me. And by Abimelech giving that, his name means like father and king. It's almost like he's the father giving his daughter to his husband. Like at 99 years old, it's like he's finally marrying her for the first time. And then he prays for Abimelech. He actually acts like a prophet for a change, praying for others. And the household is healed. And all the women suddenly have their wombs open, and so does Sarah. And she gives birth right afterwards. Life has come out of death. Out of the dead bodies of Abraham and Sarah come the new life of Isaac. This is a story about resurrection. Now, of course, everyone's excited about Isaac. Ishmael gets very jealous. Ishmael makes fun of Isaac when he's being weaned, just like his mother had, been mean to Sarah. So Sarah demands they get sent away, like get rid of Ishmael. Isaac's our heir. And Abraham doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to send his own son away out into the desert to die. And that shows some progress on Abraham's part, right? Now he's concerned about his son and about this woman whom he impregnated, right? That shows growth. But God assures him, don't worry. Ishmael can't be the heir with his Isaac. I'm going to take care of it. So Abraham, crazy enough, trusts in God. Sends Ishmael out to the desert, knowing that seems like certain death. But God does, in fact, deliver Ishmael. He's grown. He's trusting in God now. He's taking God at his word. We can see the progress in his life now. This is when he digs the well. And Abimelech's servants take it without Abimelech knowing. So then Abraham confronts Abimelech. First of all, he makes a covenant with him. So that shows again he's being a blessing to the nations again. But he also tells him, hey, your servants took my well without asking me. Now again, this is a very different thing than in the past. He's like, well, you live wherever you want. I'll just live wherever. Here he's saying, no, I dug this well. It is mine by right. He's starting to assert, he's starting to claim the promises of God for himself. Right? And he actually gives 7 lambs to Abimelech as a public witness that this well, this Beersheba, belongs to me. Lambs are offered as a sign that this land is given to Abraham and belongs to Abraham. Just like the Lamb of God, the 7-fold lamb is offered as God's testimony that, yes, you are my heirs. Right? Heaven belongs to you. And that is when he plants trees. Right? Lot left this land behind to go to Sodom because it was a more beautiful land. Abraham has to beautify this land. Right? Sometimes you have to do that. You don't go to the place that already looks appealing. The place God wants you is the place that you need to fix. That's how you're turning that land into Eden. Right? As somebody mentioned. And closing up now, right? Isaac grows up, and then God calls on Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And he does not hesitate. Why? Why is he willing to plunge a knife into Isaac? Because the promise is Isaac's going to have kids, and he doesn't have kids yet. So Abraham knows for a fact God is going to raise him from the dead. He wouldn't ask me to speak for a good reason, and he's going to give me back Isaac. So Isaac takes the wood on his back, goes up the hill to be sacrificed. Once they get there, though, and by the way, you see how Ishmael was preparation for that? Right? Learning to trust God with your son. They go up there, and that's when God reveals, no, I provided a substitute for the sacrifice. And they look over and they see a ram with his horns caught in a thorn bush. There's thorns around its head. And that thorn-headed animal, that ram, becomes sacrificed instead of Isaac. The story of Abraham is about Jesus. As I mentioned before, Abraham then gets word that his brother has had a bunch of children. He's had 12 sons, which anticipates Israel, and that there are girls among that family. So he knows that, again, God is in charge. I don't have to engineer this. God's in charge. Sarah dies, and Abraham weeps. It says he mourns and weeps. I suspect that's partly, he's not just mourning her. I feel like he's probably feeling guilty about how he failed her so many times throughout his life, but he's not going to fail her this time. Again, I'll close up. Dr. McLaren gave a great reflection on this recently, but he buys this grave, and he makes sure he pays the full price. He doesn't barter it down this time. What's it, 3,000 pieces of silver, I want to say? He pays the full sum to make it absolutely cute. The guy's like, oh, just take it for free, which he probably doesn't mean. But he says, no, I'm going to pay full prices. I want to make sure this is mine. It's like the well of Beersheba. This is my property undisputably, and I'm going to part with all these worldly goods to say that this cave belongs to me. This cave, which is in the oaks of Mamre, where God had told Sarah, life will come out of death, you will have a child. That's the spot he buries her, in this place of resurrection. Just like we're buried, supposed to be facing east, so that we rise to meet Jesus when he comes again. Right. It's a very beautiful thing, and this is the beginning of it, right? So he buries Sarah here in this cave. It's called the double cave, the cave of couples is actually what it's called. Then he sends Eliezer out to find his son and wife. He gives him all of his goods. So they can use this and finding the girl who's going to come from Haran to here just like I did. He's willing to lose all those goods. He risks all those goods to find a bride for Isaac because he knows that he needs to fulfill the covenant, right? Bring about Jesus, but he trusts in God. Go find that person, swear to me you won't compromise, and he trusts God, and sure enough, God provides Rebecca. And then we come to today, which I'm not going to go through because it's mostly a bunch of names, but Abram takes another wife named Keturah. The name Keturah means burning incense. Smoke rising from an altar, right, which Abram's been raising all this whole time. Has a bunch more kids with her, which shows A, that God is already fulfilling his promise, because even in his own life, he's a father of men. And secondly, it proves that he really was raised to light. It wasn't like Isaac was just this one-off miracle. This dude who's like, how old is he? He's 175 when he dies, is siring a whole bunch of kids in his old age, right? Life has really come back to him. This is the story about resurrection. And then finally, and then he makes sure his kids are taken care of, just like Ishmael. He knows from the story of Ishmael, these guys aren't going to be my heirs, Isaac is, but he gives them a whole bunch of goods and sends them away and makes sure they're taken care of, right? This is a guy who's changed and he's learned. Finally, he died. There's this beautiful thing in the Hebrew. How does it translate it here? It says he died at a ripe old age, grown old after a full life. The Hebrew is just he was full, like he had just finished the banquet. Isn't he full now? And Isaac and Ishmael, who had this falling out when they were kids, they come together to bury him. It's so beautiful, right? The barrier between Jew and Gentile is taken away by this man's death. Like the barrier between Jew and Gentile is taken away by the death of Jesus Christ, right? Abraham is buried, and this last little detail we get, Ishmael does in fact get blessed, right? He does become a great nation. And were you paying attention? How many sons does he have? All part of the plan, right? It's all part of God building up to Israel and ultimately to Jesus, right? Ishmael, you could say, was a mistake, but God has redeemed that mistake. God takes our experiences and molds us into the people he wants us to be. And where Abraham succeeds, he shows Jesus to us. And where he fails, he shows the power of grace. So my last thought for you today. Last thought from the story of Abraham. What will your story be? Will it be about Jesus?